Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Julie Defoe, a member of the Go West Summit team. We are very excited about this two-part destination resort situation and market update session series. If you missed part one of this series, you can view the recording on the Go West Summit website on the Education Week page. Before we get started, I have a few session details to review. You've been muted by the host, but we strongly encourage you to enter your questions into the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We really want you to get involved in this conversation, so please be sure to interact with our panelists, ask questions, use the chat function, and we'll be bringing up your questions throughout this session. We will be recording this presentation, so you can look back through the data as you wish or forward on to others who may find it informational. I'll now introduce you to Ralph Garrison, who is a founding member of Insights Collective. Ralph is a self-described resort advisor, research analyst, and storyteller. I'm sure that you'll understand this description as we dive further into this session. And without further ado, Ralph.
Good morning. I'm talking to you from the Rocky Mountains, so it's 11 o'clock hour here. My pleasure to kick off the second session that you see here is really about the planning of winter 2021, given all of the considerations around the pandemic economy, and is being organized in the town hall format. It follows the tee-up session that we had on Tuesday, and I'll just go through a bit of that for those of you who weren't in attendance, or given that it was a couple of days ago, perhaps a quick refresh will be worthwhile. Click. So what we did in part one was really focused just on the destination resort marketplace. We had determined in the Monday session an update about the international market, nicely done by Brand USA. We are keeping out of scope the US business traveler for the purposes of this discussion. So we're really focusing on the leisure traveler in Tuesday's session, and focusing on the consumer side of those sort of drivers that we're looking for to anticipate the winter season. So amongst the few things we went through there, tracking the virus, consumer booking trends and sentiment, more about that in a moment's time. Digital click, please. So this was a quick little little joke that is somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it points out, you can't manage what you can't measure. And we find ourselves in just uncharted territory as we looked into the summer. Now with it somewhat in sight, we're looking forward to the winter season, but there's not good data. We are all being disrupted in leisure travel, and whatever the dust settles, other side of the fence looks like, it has yet to become clear. So that's what we're about in our think tank. That's what we're offering you. Our group, put together by a group of industry professionals who operate independently usually, but have some associations and affiliations, got together to see if we could create a platform for sort of groupthink. This statement, none of us is as smart as all of us together, is what we're trying to demonstrate, both for ourselves and then from that platform, pushing that data out to those of you who are decision makers at the destination level, large management companies and tourist independent businesses and such. The group that you see on the right-hand side are the members of our team. In today's session, we'll be opening the floor to whoever is first to push the button and talk about subject at hand. I've asked our team members to try to limit their responses to a minute or less, because sometimes we get carried away. Hard to imagine for those of you who might know us. So we're ticking off kind of a situation assessment. The first focus, those things that impact our ability to do business over which we have no control. But if we were to go forward, we would be looking back at what we do have control over. That is what you do have control over. So you can set aside the things that you can't control and really focus on the things that you as a resort community could control. Perhaps beyond the scope of today's session, but a rhetorical question that we'll leave you with. Click. So as I tick that forward, I'm just reminding you that there are 7 drivers that we talked about, data that we are collecting as the Insight Collective. The top 3 in yellow are the ones that we focus upon on Tuesday. The bottom 4 are others to be discussed. Those of you in the audience might take a look at reopening and considerations and best practices, local sentiment and how it relates to your ability to be successful as a destination, whether your destination community is in the mood to invite with open doors, destination tourism, or to suggest not so much byway. Number 6, pretty self-explanatory. The tourism infrastructure is really being shifted rather significantly these days, and how that might affect some of you, especially those of you in leadership roles, is an open question. Finally, there's some variables out there, not only individuals who are working from home, but school breaks and how that's going to impact this coming fall and the winter booking season. So that's a little reminder of what we have done and what we did in the first. Let me put this in context. We use a think tank process. The real question that we have here, as you see right in front of you, is how can destination resorts like yourselves prepare for 2021 when there are so many unknowns? And the answer that we've come up with is there is no good way at this stage of the game to accurately anticipate the winter season. There's too many unknowns, but there is a process to be used where you can lay out several different scenarios. It's easy to say best case, worst case, and medium case, let's say, for example. But then the most important part is what are those cases dependent upon? And in our scenario, next slide, please, we've gone through the start of that process. The question, the one that I just teed up, is how can you plan for and anticipate the winter season with so many variables? The answer is you've got to come up with several different scenarios, determine what impacts those scenarios, and track them as they change throughout these coming several months. So you can see at the bottom the drivers we're focused upon. Virus management, everything's downstream from that, and we've already talked about it some. How the consumer responds and thinks about booking travel given the virus management, the return of demand, when and how it'll play, and whether it's the same as whether the people that are canceling and the people that are rebooking are one and the same. And then you see other drivers that are still on our list and to be discussed again a little later on in the day. Moving on then to the next slide, please. The first section that we talked about was really the pandemic tracking itself that Susan Rubin Stewart laid out. We ask a so what rhetorical question to ourselves. This is a reminder that those you in the audience that are interested in virus-related questions should be jotting your questions down to us. Susan, it's been 2 days now, nothing holds still. Has there anything changed on the virus side, or are there any sort of rhetorical questions or open thoughts that you've got that came from your presentation on Tuesday?
Thanks, Ralph. At the end of my presentation Tuesday, I asked why does tracking the virus in both the feeder markets and comparable destinations matter? I think you guys are probably seeing what has been happening in Sturgis, where many of the community members did not want the event to happen, have all those bikers come in, and now they are seeing a resurgence of the virus. I see how the audience could track their current and historical destination virus status against other similar destinations and their respective feeder markets. To my colleagues, I'd ask you, is there any way to get some insight looking ahead and anticipate the next few weeks or months? And what do you think they should look for?
Yeah, Susan, this is Carl Roboto. It's a pleasure to be with everyone this morning. And I think the virus tracking is an essential piece of scenario development. We seem to have come across some predictability in how the virus spreads. Mask, no mask, group dynamics, super spreader situations, and so forth. And it now becomes very clear that destinations can track not just their own virus levels in their own counties or cities, but particularly in their feeder markets. And that's a key piece of scenario planning, is what is the trend of virus tracking. Of course, there's other elements that we have to, consider, and we'll talk about those as we're going, but this right now is one of the paramount ones.
Thanks, Carl. Anyone else?
Sturgis is an extreme example. However, if it had been a smaller event and the community was tracking feeder markets that generally come in from said event, it might have been a little bit easier to say, here's the criteria, and we're going to enforce it for your good and for our good. And again, Sturgis being an extreme example, other than dropping a biosphere dome over the community, I'm not sure how it could have been controlled, but we're certainly seeing the ramifications of that since.
Those of you in the audience on the destination side, Ralph here, we're trying to help you look at your destination as a guest would compared to the other choices that they might be making. We know guests are interested in the way that resort communities where they might be vacationing are treating the virus and what the incidence of disease is, and death for that matter. And so the data that Susan showed you, and what we would encourage you to look at, is look at yourself as a guest would, and try to determine what your perspective would be, whether it's something to brag about or whether you've got more work to do shutting things down at your side. I guess that'll be it for now, and we're on to a recap of the second session. We had Tom Foley join us to use our hotel reservation activity data, not really for the hotel reservation activity itself, as much as a forward-looking indicator of guest booking and travel behaviors and what we could learn from that. Tom, any updates from you or open questions?
Not a whole lot of updates, although I'm going to kind of tie into Susan in just a second. But the biggest thing that I continue to have people think about and talk about is, booking lead times and the demand wave. As pent-up demand, we talked on Tuesday, behaves very much like an ocean wave, and it has a crest and it starts to go downward. And we're now on that downslope in the West, having seen the downslope almost completely play out in the Southeast. And what's left from that pent-up traveler is the more common traveler, who makes up the larger percentage of those who wish to travel and are still uncomfortable with traveling. And so I think that looking at current transactions and thinking about volume last week, the week before, in terms of the future, we need to be tempering our considerations and thinking about how folks are looking at it now that the pent-up demand is starting to crest. But kind of tying into Susan as well is, and Carl's comments, is around traveler sentiment and how they feel going to a destination and what might be in place to help them manage their concerns about travel and COVID-19. And the biggest news that's come out this morning, at least from an activity point of view in the travel industry for destination travel, is Vail Resorts, who own 34 resorts in North America, have put out their policies and what they're planning to do around the ski industry this year. And I think that's germane for everybody, because if we watch what happens now with bookings and the consumer fulfillment in response to having some guidance and some guardrails in place, that might help us help inform what we might expect in other markets that have major attractions and how they're planning to manage the disease going forward. So that's what I've got for us so far.
If I could piggyback on Tom's comments, I think there's some really good nuggets in there. The first is recognizing the wave of demand is now peaked initially, and a lot of people are looking at COVID management strategies in every destination, whether they feel safe and secure, or is it a madhouse in terms of what is going on. The second piece is the impact to DMOs themselves, because as we all know, most DMOs are funded either by municipal funding or a business improvement district or something, rely to visitor volume. And so as that volume crests and comes down and again is dependent on visitors coming back, but if you don't have COVID management strategies in practice, you're really in a tough position. That's now going to impact the structure and strategy of DMOs moving forward. So it's it's a system almost that is tied together in a lot of different ways, and every destination is going to have to stop and look at how do we manage the pieces of the system or the drivers that we've identified, to their benefit.
One thing leads to another, and something Tom said struck a nerve with me. In Tom and Chris's data yesterday, I think personal health and safety about the virus was the #1 consideration. The resort being open with enough activities and attractions to attract the guest. We'll watch that carefully. Vail Resorts is going to be limiting their supply by way of example, as many will have to, depending upon the pandemic in the local community. And so that one rings pretty strongly and sort of echoes in that part. The third part, though, was related to the consumer being able to cancel their reservations. And that is up to you destinations to some extent, if and how you will allow that, so they feel like they can book with the confidence that if things aren't to their liking, they can cancel back out. Travel insurance is playing a really interesting part in that, just going nuts in terms of what's being sold these days. But there are some nuances in what travel insurance covers versus what the consumer would like to have it cover, creating quite a quandary for how we provide assurance to the guest between our own policies and the insurance policies of the travel companies. A little mess there that I think those in the business of making a reservation have an opportunity to work and clean up.
Ralph, this is Jesse. Can I jump in for just a second and add a little bit of thought?
Do.
Jesse True, nice to be with all of you. My thought on Vail Resorts announcement today as it relates to an attraction within a destination that's driving after leisure business also has to do with the access to that attraction. I believe, at least what I read this morning, Vail Resorts is going to limit the initial reservations to be able to ski or ride to those folks who have Epic passes. So as you sort of take that more globally, access to the attraction and its impact on destination demand will be very, very interesting to track. I'm sure Tom and his group at Entopia will be doing that, but it's going to be curious to sort of see who can come to town with access to both lodging as well as then access to the attraction, the ski hill in this case, and how that is governed overall. The Epic and now the Icon passes or the Mega passes certainly have created many more locals out of ski areas that may live outside but have access to the mountain. So for the destination, it is still an out-of-state guest, but it's very important that they have access to the attraction. So that's sort of yet another nuance within the overall game plan that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I'll just add in about 10 or 15 seconds here just to say that's true, and it's something that we've talked about internally as one of the drivers. Is in this case, we're talking about a corporation acting as gatekeeper, but is there a role of the DMO or other jurisdictionally focused entity to play gatekeeper the way Vail Resorts is with reservations? Rhetorical at the moment.
There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and we know that a lot of the attendees today are not necessarily mountain resort destinations. However, in your communities, you have attractions that could be drivers in the community. So how do you work together to put all of those pieces together? And we've done it over the years, but it is going to look so markedly different from what it has before. So how do we work with that? So Ralph, I'm going to toss it to you to toss it to Chris.
Barb, Chris Carey here. I was just going to comment. I was the one who presented some of the consumer data at the last meeting, and I think what I wanted to emphasize was a role at the community level to try to deal with some of the safety concerns of consumers. They want to know that they're going to be safe. They want to know the rules. And we talked some about the disconnect between people feeling comfortable eating outdoors and concerned about moving indoors and the implications of that in warm weather destinations as well as cold weather as we move into the winter season. They also were primarily and strongly concerned about air travel. And I think this idea of trying to track safety over time from the consumer's vantage point will provide some metrics that can fuel the scenario type approach if you go that route, but also just identifying your role in communicating to guests. Other comments from the team?
Well, a couple of Ralph here. First, Jesse, to your point, I wonder if a family planning a ski vacation could arrive at a resort only to find out they can't get a lift ticket. Awkward.
Communications problem.
Are we going
I
to?
think it'll absolutely happen.
Are we going to end up in the days of prepackaged vacations? You know, FIT packages of a decade or two ago, so somebody can buy with confidence the pieces that they need. Is that an opportunity for destinations or for intermediaries? Inquiring minds want to know. By the way, to the audience, we have no questions, and you can see that the consequences of that are we're just going to keep talking amongst ourselves about what we think is important. But Chris, you brought up something about air travel. I would be surprised if the audience doesn't have some interest in how that's developing and such. So I'm going to titillate the audience. If anybody wants to hear about air travel and what we think about it and its impact on the winter season, ping us on the group question. Otherwise, we're going back to you, Chris, for anything else you've got on your slide, or we'll go on forward.
Let me jump in on something Chris just mentioned so we don't lose it, and that is the messaging of safety. We're just finishing a little study on California DMOs, and it's not done, but I had a chance to peek in this morning at a few pieces of data. And one of the things that I find very fascinating is DMOs still believe their most important role is to promote the destination or talk about the destination. And below that, 2 or 3 rungs is, the safety message and all the rest of that. And I think some DMOs are going to have to look at, hey, should we begin to adjust our messaging mix and talk more about the safety features and so forth of the destination, as well as the fact that we've got open space and so on and so forth. And so that mix may change or need to change moving forward if it hasn't already with some DMOs. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry about that.
If I could just jump in real quick too, this is Jane Babylon. One thing I think along with that communication that needs to be considered is the destinations probably need to be looking at that as kind of a 2-pronged approach. They need to not only be communicating out to the potential guests, the safety, but they need to be communicating with their local residents as well, and letting them know, that the guests coming in are being informed of what the regulations are, and that the guests coming in are as concerned about safety as they are, and try to get that resident population on board as much as possible as well, to try to avoid some of the backlash we're seeing in some destinations.
And I think one element of those communications is the wearing of masks and the social distancing. And again, we find that the guests want to know what the rules are going to be. There's a big political divide in terms of wearing of masks, and it's become even a point of debate today because there's issues of whether there'll be masks worn at the presidential talk tonight. So it's become a lightning rod issue, but it's one where the consumer wants to know the rules, and it's important that you help them know in advance, and then you also walk the talk. You need to be living by the rules and communicating those rules anywhere you can in the community.
Well done, Chris. I'm Ralph here. I'm taking a look at the chat and just a couple of things. Mary Matzenbacher points out that some national parks have been on a reservation system for a while, and sure enough, they find themselves turning people away who expect access at the destination. If we apply the Vail Resorts metaphor to other destinations, communication is something that could alleviate that a little. But there's also a note from Kent Elliott who points out that if Vail Resorts and others are really only going to make their tickets available on a reservation system, how do you make a prepackaged vacation? I imagine that somewhere in there, there's a way for a lift ticket to be bundled with a room and a and an air ticket by a tour operator, an Intermedia, Expedia, or the resort themselves. Although it's not yet clear in that announcement just came out this morning.
You know, Ralph, the reservation system tool, I think is something that is here to stay and is going to be managed differently. Even at the very, very local level, the place where I swim now has a reservation system to save a lane. And when you walk in, you get checked with your temperature and all the rest. And funny enough, the other day I was in there and the people in front of me had just shown up, no reservation, and they couldn't go. I get it's a very micro level, but I think, you know, now that Vail has sort of made this statement in that direction, I think it's going to have a reverberation with other attractions and so forth, and restaurants, and a lot of these folks are already doing it. So reservations may become more and more a fact of life.
Play the game. Moving on, click.
Susan had a comment quickly, and then we'll move on.
Sorry.
I just was going to say, I think people are already getting used to it when places like Disney and Universal Studios is requiring reservations. I think it's just a matter of communications and getting people to plan ahead of time, and maybe provide some kind of activity for that family who does show up and can't get into the park. Make sure that you're prepared with alternatives, because you don't want to sour them on your destination, but there must be something that they can do with maybe a list of other recommendations that don't require reservations or might have openings.
Apparently you can go on a cruise line without a reservation almost anywhere you want. There are opportunities. Carl, you told us one quick question, one quick thing about your survey about destinations budgets.
Yeah.
This is their visitation. Can you recap that? It was hilarious.
Yeah, one of the things that we've asked, again, we're doing a study of DMOs in California, and it's not quite done, but I've been peeking in a little bit of the data. And one of the things that we have found in our study, and we have DMOs with budget sizes from 100,000 to 15 million participating, is 90% indicate they will have a budget reduction for the remainder of this year and probably through 2021. What's interesting also is the size of those budget reductions, roughly between 25 and 75% budget reduction. And so that's going to have a significant impact on a lot of things tied to the DMO, overall structure of a DMO, and a really tightening down of strategies, a focus on efficiency. And so those dynamics are going to play out. And again, it ties in with Tom's mention of the demand wave is falling. And so I think DMOs are about to get if they haven't already, perhaps an even bigger reality check.
Well, new realities indeed. Onward and upward. Next slide, please. Maybe there's a little delay. What is coming is a revisitation of the 7 drivers that our group, the Insight Collective, has been following for some time now. We have gone back and replowed the ground of the first 3. The next 4 that you see there are yet to be discussed and are on our list to do so that we have an opportunity to take any questions from you or just relive some of the discussions that we're having about these other several subjects in the process. I'm also going to give you a sneak peek of some other less significant considerations than the 7 drivers that you see here, but also at play. Barb, would you just give us a quick little look at slide 13, please? That's advancing one more. This whole notion about the return of demand, you know, is there going to be plenty of demand for your winter vacation? And how about the supply? Will supply be the problem with COVID limitations, or will they both drop down? It gives us a chance to look at the attractions. Of course, we've just talked about the ski example. Lodging and bed base and its limitations. There are some variations that you may want to know about between vacation rentals, condos, and hotels, groups and FIT business. And the transportation piece already referenced. I'm continuing to look at the questions and answers to see if you, the audience, are guiding us that direction. Barb, slide forward one more slide, please, to 14. Some of the other things around the outside or the financial markets just going nuts. How do you reconcile that? The nicest way I could think about the politics is, say, the breakdown of the geopolitical order around the election, which of course is at the same time as the reservation. And you see some other items here that are out there as forces of play. One more slide, Barb. And finally, kind of the tourism infrastructure side, what it means to destination management organizations and marketing organizations, do municipal entities, and some of you larger properties or properties at multi-destinations that may be faced with the kinds of changes that Carl talked about and the need to reposition yourselves in the process. Barb, thanks. Let's go back up to slide 12 now. These are all items on the list. If we continue at our own pace, we'll be done in approximately 2.5 hours. So mindful of that, I am back to conversations about reopening and the extent to which reopening is successful. And of course, we've seen several situations that Susan pointed out with a couple of different spikes or a couple of different waves where the original hope for a reopening in early June was that reopening would be successful. It would not result in an increase of the pandemic, and the whole thing would come and go by the end of the summer, not just disappearing, as I've heard in a tweet, but being well managed and benefiting from the economic consequences. That was thought to be a V-level recovery. Well, it's come and gone. The next best hope was a U-level recovery, taking some time. Now it's looking like in many cases, there's a V involved. And it has to do with sort of matching supply and demand in the process. Let me tee out to the group and to anybody in the audience, what are the considerations around reopening that we ought to be mindful of, or what is the status as we close summer and look to winter?
And one of the ways to look at it for our participants, and in the old days, 5 months ago, when I would be working with groups, focus groups or strategic planning sessions, I'd ask them what their pain points are. We don't have time to enumerate all the pain points that we're having right now. However, as you look forward, where are the areas that you most are either looking for some feedback or information, or what have you experienced that you're thinking, this worked, and we could share this with others on the call, especially when it comes to the reopening. I'm almost hesitating to call it reopening anymore because it's going to be a constant evolution of moving forward in 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back if we're lucky on that. But I'd be interested in having someone in the Q&A box also, and we'll keep monitoring it, jump in. One of the questions we had on reopening from the Tuesday session is, when can we expect European travelers to begin coming to the US? And in the session on international yesterday at Go West, I'm hesitating because I think, oh God, this is bad news. But it really had to do with how our country is lacking a cohesive policy, and European travelers are not used to that. And they're looking for that cohesive policy. So if you have been dependent on international travelers, what might be the messaging that you could put forward to start generating some of that business again? So I'm going to put that again out to our panel. What are you seeing, and or what is some of the information we've put in our research library which would be relevant to that?
Ralph, just to jump in on your and Barb's comments on reopening, just because you have a reopening date doesn't mean you have a willing crowd. And I live here in South Lake Tahoe, and many of you might have seen in some of the press, we've actually been having weekend protests, both on Fridays when people arrive in town. There's 4 roundabouts that bring you access into the basin here, and then also as people leave. And the local sentiment has been very mixed, and at times very, unfriendly, unfortunately. And that's a function of local resident fear, as well as visitors, really trashing the place. And so it's an interesting dynamic. An opening day or opening date or opening sequence or whatever is only part of that equation, and really, leads you back to what are the different scenarios that a destination or DMO needs to look at with whatever these variables are most important to them.
Well, that really goes from our think tank driver number 4.
Ralph, can I just interject something there real quick?
Please go ahead.
On to what Carl talked about. I think what's really starting to show up in the news a lot, I think someone mentioned this earlier, is the super spreader events. And to work, and I realize we have some very large CTOs on this call, and we have some very small DMOs. And and I'm sorry, large DMOs, like the Colorado Tourism Office. But I think focusing on the safety and reopening, and the message is, what are we doing to prevent the super spreader events? Park City had one where there was a private birthday party in a lodging property. I think it was even a hotel. And that they ended up with something like 55 cases out of it. So what are we doing to prevent the super spreader events? It's becoming bigger news that something like 10 different studies, but between 10 and 20% of the people are passing the virus on to 80% of the people. So it's becoming big news, and I would focus on that in your reopening and your communication about reopening.
So Ralph, here, one thing about reopening, and that is, when, as you guys know, internally, when we started doing this, it was 1st of June, and most destinations were opening for their first time and getting themselves back open after being closed for several months. Now we're seeing different versions of reopening, and I think this is another one that has to be tracked. Here's how it goes, and you guys all know this. When the incidence of the virus peaks at a destination, as per the tracking that's done by health, then their regulations change and trickle through the economy, opening and closing some amount of services and facilities to the destination, which then impacts the guest. That's where messaging comes in, to try to get that message out to the guest in a light that allows them to make a decision. Then that cycle just moves all over again as the virus spikes, the restrictions close, as the restrictions take over, the pandemic is reduced, it opens it up. It's like a rheostat going back and forth. And I think we're going to see that continuously through the late summer and the fall, especially as we get into the fall season for flu and what might be COVID-20 at that stage of the game. So the reopening and the related communication is something that we probably keep a track of all the time. And that's the bridge to where I think Carl was talking about with the local sentiment, because now you've got the ability to open your doors to the guests, but do you have local buy-in sufficient to do so? And I think there's a discussion there too. I'll hold for the group input and then offer my own thoughts down the road.
Yeah, Ralph, Carl here again. I think you're right. I think if I were a DMO head, I would be really focused on the messages that Chris brought up in terms of management. And in fact, I would even consider that a branded position in the marketplace, which no destination has right now. To be the destination in my region or my state or wherever, that we have got really uniform enforcement. We've got everybody on the same page. We've got alignment both within the community and going out. I think those destinations are going to have a longer term competitive advantage versus destinations that are whipsawed back and forth between management messages and infection rates and so on and so forth. And so I think that's really the long-term interest. And also that local sentiment is going to be key because what's happened is local sentiment has morphed from, residents being angry about over-tourism and those issues prior to COVID-19. That has now morphed into COVID-19. And local sentiment, local residents have figured out this political process very, very, very clearly, and that balance is going to be ever more important for a DMO to walk.
It seems like it is inconsistent amongst and between destinations. Some destinations are coming out, doubling down and getting back into the marketplace, trying to reestablish their destination tourism. Others seem to be really putting the closed sign out for all intents and purposes, right? Based on local sentiment, they cannot come up with a message that that destination guests are welcome. So that puts them in, two relatively different scenarios, if you will, about how the destinations are being able to position themselves between doors open and we're marketing, or doors closed and we're not. And another piece that kind of comes out of the lodging side that I'm hearing more and more about, I know our group has been focused on it for almost 2 months now, and that is there appears to be a shift that looks like people coming into the resort community but staying longer than a typical destination guest, right? So the profile of that guest is not somebody that comes for a weekend for a week, but somebody that comes for a month or a couple of months. And with parents no longer needing to physically go to work, with kids able to do schooling remotely, that's now a digital family that can go anywhere. And they seem to be doing so, creating yet a unique category of folks moving into a community, perhaps for months, perhaps permanently, really changing the profile of a short-term guest to what do we call these guys? Don't have a name for them. They're more like second homeowners, I guess, than they would be either a full-time local or a destination guest. That seems like that's going to take short-term bed base, but give the local community some economic sustenance from those who come and stay. Any thoughts?
I just saw an ad for Catalina Island doing exactly that. We're your place for longer stay visits, and I think it was intimating exactly what your suggestion. We're an island, we're off the coast, we've got capacity, obviously, and I think, that is definitely going to be a niche. Our destination had the infamy of being on a Wall Street Journal article yesterday about residents in California buying into Tahoe because now they can, work from home and school from home and all the rest of that. And so I think, we're just a tiny microcosm, but I think you're right, Ralph. I think we're going to see that across the board to some degree or another.
Yeah, I've even seen ads. I believe it was the Ritz-Carlton. I could be wrong, but it was one of the upscale luxury hotels advertising for some of their resorts, and they were actually setting up places that could be designated as virtual classrooms for the kids to come in and do their online school in, as well as enhanced business centers and that kind of thing for the working adults that want to be there and stay, and offering, special rates for these extended stay families. So I think that's definitely going to be a trend that we're going to continue to see, not only at the destination level, but down to the property level as well.
How does that change the profile of what a destination would describe as their leisure guest? How is that skewing both the marketing, the sales efforts? Jane and I are managing the resource library for the group, and we have over 800 entries in there right now, where we're tracking information, articles, etc. I probably have only seen 1 or 2 industry-based articles that address what the sales efforts going forward look like. Because I'll go back to door. It has been gone for a while. However, what does a sales team look like, and where are we going to be targeting their efforts, and how does that blend with the marketing efforts? Carl, Chris, Jesse and Carl especially have both had experience in managing sales teams. What is that going to look like?
I think the reality is, unfortunately, your sales team is smaller, and they are more focused on the leisure travel sales. I hesitate to say group because what everybody knows is that it's going to be a long time before large association, conference, corporate groups are going to return to any of the sort of tourism destinations. The sales team is probably going to be most focused, or will be most focused, on bringing back the sort of loosely affiliated FIT-like travelers first and foremost. But I think it's going to be a bit. Those folks who double down on the sales efforts now, when we were in the recession of 07, 08, 09, at least in the ski industry business that I was in, those people who double down and stick with it are going to be first to rebound. And as Ralph was talking about a V-shaped rebound, I think their rebound is much quicker. It does take some fortitude in order to stick with it over those time frames and continue relationships. From a marketing standpoint, I think the same holds true. And the reality is that marketing efforts do need to be far more targeted. Luckily, we live in a technology age where we can be very targeted to those folks that do have the ability to travel and perhaps stay for a longer period of time, as Ralph was talking about.
You know, Barb, we have a concept called managing through. How do you just manage through something? And I was talking to a director of sales at one of the major casinos in Reno the other day, and I was asking him how he was managing through. And as you know, as Jesse suggested, there's no group stuff in sight. You know, it all FIT leisure, and they're doing everything they possibly can to manage that, including compliance with COVID management in the casino and so forth. But in the process of managing through, they are keeping those relationships live and warm and whatnot on the group side, and they are looking and working with them, you know, as quickly as they can find a time, place, and space where a group function might fall back into play. But again, that's probably on a little bit longer time horizon.
And we're talking a lot about lodging properties here, but if you think about it from the attraction standpoint too, you know, maybe there's some opportunities to get creative for these families that are there for long-term stays, as well as for local families whose kids are doing online school. You know, maybe there's an opportunity to have a ski school PE class, right? Because they're not getting PE at school, or a hiking class, or, you know, whatever your destination or your resort offers. Maybe there's ways to get creative and offer some solutions out to these families that are looking for ways for kids to be occupied while the parents are working, you know, and they've got online school and they want to get them outside. You know, I think there's definitely some opportunities for creativity to help bring some people back in.
I'd like to build on what Jane just said. The opportunity to potentially, you know, parents are going crazy, right, about this online school and how much of their own time it's taking. And they'd like to either get back to work, or they'd like to have some quiet time themselves. I hate to say it, but what about some tutors? So the parents don't have to oversee their online schooling. Provide, you know, if they're, hate to go back to the mountain activity, but maybe you can, would be the same as rafting guides or something along those lines. But ski instructors who there's not enough ski school for, they're used to working with kids. You know, there are teachers who may not be going back to working at the school. Maybe they can be an online tutor, but provide the parents some additional oversight so they can also enjoy their vacation.
It manages its curriculum base. Chris has had his hand up for a while.
Well, I was just going to use the word nimble in terms of the challenges for sales staff. I think you have to read the changing situation, and I think there's no better example than schools and even universities in terms of the ground rules that are being put in place and the expectation that those are going to shift around. And to sum up what we've just been saying, if there is availability by day of week, opening up either Fridays or Mondays, depending upon major school districts, That allows you to strengthen the visitation during the week, and all the things we just said are possible ways of trying to serve families who come to the resort and have flexibility they never had in the past.
Susan? Well, Susan, you're muted. I knew we wouldn't be able to get through without at least saying that once.
Looks like she's muted. I'll take her spot for
No, that's okay. I'm sorry. I wanted to read one of the chats, and I'm having a problem with my chat box covering my microphone. So, Kent Elliott from Jackson Hole suggested that your destination can be a classroom in itself. Highlight the educational aspects of your area: history, flora, fauna, environment, wildlife. Lots of opportunities for outdoor education and real life science labs, winter and summer. Oh, that part came from Jesse. Thank you.
You know, if you step back and look at this, look at how much innovation is coming as a result of this pandemic. And it's just all these ideas that we're seeing from the audience and the collective. The innovation is absolutely amazing in terms of new ideas for this, new ideas for that. And some of these ideas are going to be legacy ideas that stay with a destination or a DMO. At the same time, I think every organization, whether you're a DMO, a hotel, or whatever, is really evolving to adjust to this. And there's three key things that seem to come to my mind, and that is the adaptability. If your culture doesn't allow you to adapt, you're going to have a tough time. You've got to be able to make decisions quickly because you can't rest on them. And thirdly, you've really got to be looking at efficiency, especially in the DMO world, because staffing and funding may not be going forward what it was, 5 months ago. And so, the adaptation could be a nice silver lining, if you will, moving forward, if we're looking for silver linings.
So put this together, and we aren't controlling the pandemic. Reopening is going more like a W as we approach the winter season. The digital nomad family represents a potential opportunity to relocate and might be the alternative to the short-term guest. We just need to bundle it up in such a way that it works. And if our destination involves all these educational opportunities, but we don't have meetings and conferences, then somebody's going to turn their meeting and conference facility into a big kindergarten for kids to go with the digital family that comes to town and repurpose themselves and live happily ever after. Do I have it right?
Right.
Or have too much coffee? Both could be true.
All
Interesting,
of the above.
interesting notion. And I'm seeing some others, baseball camp and after school programs, that work around the problems being created to the agility and creativity that you're talking about, working particularly well in the outdoor arena, right? Which would have worked very well, has worked very well in the summer and probably into the fall. Little trickier maybe in the winter, at least in the mountain winters, right, where it's too cold to be out. Or we're gonna have all sorts of people skiing and cross-country skiing and snowshoeing all over the mountains, but not on the slopes themselves. Well, we're moving through the reopening, the local sentiment. I've talked about school a little bit. Let's jump to the item number 7 down at the bottom. As schools reopen, there do seem to be a wave of considerations that go through the marketplace. We've got that on our list to track. Let's talk amongst ourselves and share with the group why we think that's a driver that needs to be tracked and what some of the outcomes might be. Anybody willing to get that conversation started?
I think we've already been doing it in some detail. However, as the collective knows, what we've talked about among ourselves is that breaks are almost a thing of the past as far as being a driver for a lot. This is the only time you'll have a break. I think that the breaks are going to be much more fluid than it was before, which could be good because it would flatten out demand and have it be almost season long. So if that is indeed the case, and or being able to homeschooled, well, I'm going to take Tuesday and take the kids skiing for the more regional areas. Again, where are the opportunities? And if you're not a ski resort, if you're a destination, for example, in Arizona or in the San Diego area, what is available in your communities that would be a draw for the leisure traveler on the what used to be what we would call shoulder times, and actually, again, could be flattened out. So I'll toss that back to the team.
You know, Barb, you bring up a really interesting point, and that is, you know, for a long time, we always have thought destination assets are tied to the natural environment or the physical things that we have, golf courses, hotels, and so forth. But I think more and more what I'm seeing, and I think what we're seeing, the real asset base of a destination is its creativity, is its ability to reimagine, to rethink, to look at adjacent possibilities that this pandemic has sort of led us to. And those destinations that can harness that creativity, bring those ideas to the marketplace quickly, I think are the ones that are going to be able to weather the storm the best.
Someone just mentioned San Diego. I think that was you, Carl. Can you imagine if the San Diego Zoo came up with a week-long curriculum that parents could actually present to the school as even a substitute for their online schooling?
Wow.
You know, I just took a look at Viking Cruise Lines. This is a part of the industry that has been absolutely devastated. And one of the things that they've done that I think is genius that DMO should look at is they've gone into every destination that they visit and have brought forth key global speakers on all these different topics. And so they're finding a new way to keep a relationship alive with the cruising public. And in that process, they've put together this incredible ensemble of presentations from, you know, incredible lecturers and so forth. And so they're finding a new way to create that connection, which is, you know, that can be done with the San Diego Zoo or whatever it may be. But it really is a nice example of adaptation in an industry that's just been devastated.
So we're getting close to the end, but we also had that final item about DMOs and what it means to the DMOs. Barb, drop us back one slide and we'll just see if we can finish up on that paradigm shift for DMOs. Obviously, our conversation has gone into a creative realm of matching the changing consumer to a different kind of attraction that we might be able to make up, or that you might be able to make up, that works better in a COVID-friendly environment and allows you to distinguish yourselves and to create demand in a different way than you would have been able to in the past. But the rhetorical question is who takes the lead, right? What communities work together and how well they do that, and the DMO's role therein. We see DMOs that are well positioned to do just this kind of thing and are stepping forward. Of course, local sentiment has to be one of the equations, right? They have to be ready, willing, and able. Politics, civics, funding, and the like. We also see others that are putting their heads under the sand and just trying to get by for the time being. No fault of their own, right? Just not prepared for what they're encountering. So at this stage of the game, I would have to say it's rhetorical about where and how DMOs are going to be able to play as we track these items at the macro level and try to inform those of you who are available. It's a sort of, you only pay for what you need, but we aren't charging for anything. So if there's anything here that's interesting, please stay in touch with us and we'll try to feed you. We'll also be trying to focus our process of think tank driving that we're doing at a national level down to a local or a regional level, and offer a toolkit here in the next few weeks for any of you that are interested in tracking these items yourselves as you go on forward. Barb, I think you are typically the closer, but I seem to have gotten on a roll here. Anything else that you've got to close the group, as I see our obligation to do so on time?
No, it's been a great conversation. Thanks, team, for punting, which we do well. And I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Well, thank you all to the Insights Collective team for driving this conversation forward, and thank you all for joining us today. Please be sure to look at the recordings which are on our website. You can see part 1 for reference and also rewatch this one.